In fact, neither really needs much of an introduction to you. But nevertheless, on my extreme right, on the right of the... on the right of the platform is Rabbi Charley Bagnisky, the rabbi at the South Bucks Liberal Jewish Congregation, and also the Liberal Judaism's Director of Strategy and Partnerships. And with the Director of Operations, Shelley Shokolinsky-Dwyer, they have been running the movement for the last 6 months, while I've been sunning myself in West Finchley. To my left, right... To my right is Gillian Merron. And she again needs no introduction to you. She's, of course, one of the country's most prominent liberal Jews and one of the country's most prominent British servants of the Jewish community. A former Member of Parliament for Lincoln, a former government minister serving in the Departments of International Development, of Health, where she was the Public Health Minister, of Transport and of the Foreign Office. Gillian is now the Chief Executive of the Board of Deputies of British Jews. And I can't tell you how proud we are that a liberal Jew should be the professional head of the Board of Deputies. As you would expect, like all Jewish public servants, she carries out her duties in an unscrupulously independent manner. But as far as we're concerned, she's always one of us. Having said that, I'm going to hand over to the two of them, and they will keep you amused, fascinated, challenged, entertained, and any other verbs you can think of in the English language.
Thank you, Danny. The format for the following hour is going to be that I'm going to ask Gillian some questions, and then we'll open, hopefully that will give you some material, if you don't already have it, which I'm sure you do, to ask her some questions yourselves. Gillian, first of all, thank you so much for being with us. As Pleasure. Danny said, we are very proud to count you amongst us, both as the community of liberal Jews, but also to have you representing us at the Board of Deputies. But I know that for me, I know you quite well. We've spent a lot of time together one way or another over the years. But a lot of people here, although they will have seen your face a lot, won't necessarily know about your background and where your journey started. So I thought that maybe it would be useful and interesting if you could begin by telling us a little bit about your background.
Okay, well, thank you. And it's actually a real honour to just have a little quiet private chat with Charlie in front of all of you. And of course, everything I say is private between me and Absolutely. Charlie. But seriously, it is a great honour, and I love coming to the Biennial. And so to be here as one of the keynotes is an extra honour. Background. Well, have you seen the film Made in Dagenham? I'm made in Dagenham. I'm made in Dagenham. I'm the youngest of 5. My parents, my late parents, children of refugees to this country from Lithuania. And whilst they had a very Jewish upbringing in the East End, and you'll be very familiar with this, however, by the time they got to Dagenham, 5 children, living in a council house. My dad worked in the factory that put the batteries into the cars at Ford, and my mum was a waitress or a shop assistant. By the time they got to there, they reluctantly, I understand, took a kind of decision to let the Jewish bit go. And what I can remember is the message, if you tell people you're Jewish, they'll pick on you. So I knew I was Jewish, but I didn't have a Jewish upbringing. And all that kind of... So I'm a bit late to the party, really, but it's quite a party. And I know we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, so maybe before we do talk about the Judaism, tell us a little bit about becoming an MP and why was that the way that you wanted to engage in society?
Well, I didn't, Charlie.
Okay.
I didn't. I actually categorically, on a number of occasions when asked, said, I don't want to be an MP. It just all frankly seemed too much. Such a huge change of life, so exposed in the public arena. Why would anyone want to do this? This is, of course, this is from, I should say, I spent most of my life in the East Midlands, so a bit of a cheer for the East Midlands. Yes. We're all right in the East Midlands. I spent 15 years living in Derby, and I just ended up there by chance because that's where I got my first job in local government, and then moved to Lincoln in '97 when I was elected as Member of Parliament, and still keep my home and my community there. And why did I want to become an MP? Well, I'm somebody that really believes that in your worst moments, your best decisions come. And it never seems like that at the time, but it's always worth reminding ourselves. And what I can remember, those of you who are of a certain age will remember the 1992 general election, and I know some of you in the room will remember that, when Labour lost yet again. And it seemed like Labour would never, ever be able to win. And it was, and I don't use this word lightly, it was a very depressing time. And there was a collective depression, but I think there was individual depression as well. Because you will know this feeling. When you believe in something that's right and just, and you want to do all you can, and you can't do it because you don't have the power to do it. I, at the time, was a trade union official in the East Midlands for, again, those of a certain age will remember the National Union of Public Employees, NUPE. And I was a senior official representing mostly part-time, low-paid women workers. And they were relying on a Labour government, because you'll remember then there was no national minimum wage, there were few workers' rights, people who were in those jobs were being stamped on at every opportunity. And so there I was, an active trade union official with that kind of background of, public service. And Labour lost yet again, and I was very, very involved in the Labour Party. I joined the Labour Party and my trade union within 1 month of getting to Derby. Derby was a real turning point for me. I waited till I left university to join the Labour Party. I didn't join it although I was on the left, I didn't join it at university because I decided it wasn't good enough for me. As in those times, it didn't fit my politics. And also somebody had made the mistake of saying it would be good for you to join the Labour Party. Well, if you tell me something's good for me, I'm not going to do it. But as soon as I got to Derby and I got into my first job, I joined both within a month, and that transformed my life. And I worked my way up in a voluntary capacity, both through the union and the Labour Party, always in opposition. But going back to the 92 thing, because it was like a switch flicked for me. And the switch that was flicked was, it was so bad to have lost, and it looked like we could never win, and we could never help the people I was in politics to help. My next thought was, well, I have to do more. Well, by then I'd come to believe there's no point sitting on the outside and campaigning and marching, and that all has a place, by the way, but I'd done that, and it didn't seem to have done enough. And I decided, and it was all on a flick of a switch, that there's only one place for me where it really matters, and that's legislation. Because as a union official, every way I went, I was coming up against laws that were working against those part-time, low-paid women and male workers. And I found that hugely frustrating. And then, of course, that meant I need to be an MP. I tell you, at that moment, I was terrified, absolutely terrified at that thought. And there was a point where I came to terms with it, having, those lists that you write,
pros and cons.
Pros and cons of standing to be an MP, not standing for an MP, and delaying it. Now, what's interesting, I suddenly thought, that's a great idea. I'll delay it. What if I'd missed 1997? Wouldn't have been my best move.
No.
But you can't know that in 1992, can you? But I always remember confessing to my Member of Parliament, Margaret Beckett, who has always been a tremendous friend and mentor to me and remains so now. I hugely admire Margaret for a whole range of reasons. I remember saying, Margaret, I'd like to come and talk to you about something. It's a bit personal. Yes, of course, come round. So I come round to her house and she's brushing her hair. I always remember this moment. She's brushing her hair. And I said, and I'm shaking. I'm absolutely, Margaret, I want to be an MP. And she stops brushing her hair, slams this hairbrush down. I'm thinking, what is she going to say? She said, about time too.
So if it was about time to join the Labour Party, it's
about time to agree to be an MP. Yes.
It strikes me that the values that you were talking to about feeling the need to get involved are many of those values that I know that you appreciate in liberal Judaism, and part of the reason that you count yourself as a liberal Jew. But you weren't involved in Judaism at all at that point. So where does the Judaism fit in? How do you reconnect from the Dagenham absence to the now sitting at the liberal Judaism Biennial speaking?
It's amazing. Don't you think it's amazing?
Really a journey. It is a journey.
I every morning wonder how this
happened.
How did it happen? So whilst I wasn't schooled in Judaism, I knew I was Jewish, but I never really didn't talk about it. And I did exactly as my mother said. I hid it. I didn't make a big fuss. I went to school in Wanstead, where of course there are a lot of Jewish people, and a lot of my friends were Jews. Actually, if I'm honest, when I've reflected, I don't think I've never felt that I fitted anywhere. And so actually, all these years later, I feel I've found a place, and I'm much calmer in myself for that. Because it isn't a good place when you don't fit. I think we all know that feeling. Because I was Jewish, but I wasn't Jewish. I wasn't. However, I've always had a connection with Israel. When I left school, before I went to university in Lancaster, I was a kibbutz volunteer. In fact, I was there just last Saturday. In fact,
we had a conversation.
We did. I called you. Yes, that's right. I was in Israel, but I was on kibbutz Nachshon, and I still have cousins there. And I was visiting last week, and I always love just to sit and feel. Well, I get all the old memories back. But so they said, I met them once, and they said, come to Israel, and I thought, why not? So I've always had that feeling for Israel. And then the other thing that, even though I wasn't practicing in any way as a Jew, the other thing that really touched me was to do with the Holocaust. And whilst I haven't lost didn't lose family directly, my family came to Britain earlier than that to escape the pogroms, something really got to me about it. And when I became an MP, I got involved with the Holocaust Education Trust. So, again, I wasn't practicing as a Jew, but I was in my way saying, I am one, and this is, so Labour Friends of Israel was a natural place for me to be as an MP, Holocaust Education Trust. I was comfortable there, but I still was missing something.
You talk about not having found a place to be before, and as you walk around the halls here, you see our home for your Jewish story everywhere, and you did find a home for your Judaism very much in Lincoln. How did you find the community? How did you take that step through the door?
Where's the other Gillian, as we call her? There she is. So both of us are Gillian in Lincoln. You must remember there's less than 30 members and 2 of us are called Gillian. So we're both called the other Gillian to avoid confusion. So in Lincoln there is a small liberal Jewish community, but it took me some years to connect with it. And what actually, again, the lesson of this is we need to remember there's all sorts of ways people can come to us. And my way was, I was invited as the Member of Parliament to an exhibition in the cathedral, and it was the Anne Frank Trust. So you can see that would play to my interests. As an MP, I would have gone anyway, of course. But personally, I really wanted to be there. So, I'm wandering around thinking, I'm Jewish, right, but no one actually, bear in mind in Lincoln, it doesn't really register that somebody might be Jewish, because there's only, in the whole county, there's me and 61 others.
Right.
So...
another Gillian.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And 2 are called Gillian. And none of them are called Gillian Shepherd. Note to Danny Rich. Everyone's waiting for her to come in.
Tomorrow's guest.
Yes, tomorrow's. So I went to this exhibition and I saw a man with a kippah on his head, and don't ask me why, but I went and talked to him, and it was Gillian's late and dear father, Alan Levine, who was then secretary. Gillian's now our secretary, it runs in the family. And just chatting to him, and something in me wanted to tell him I was Jewish. And he was so nice, and he didn't push it. He must have sensed something, because if you push me too far, I back off. And he said, I'll start sending you the newsletter, which he did. That was quite interesting. But one day I opened the newsletter and an invitation fell out, and it was an invitation to a Hanukkah party. And I thought, well, I could do that, because it's not too religious. It's not a service. And I rang the phone number, and it was the other Gillian. And she was so friendly that I felt able to turn up, not just on my own, but remember, I'm the Member of Parliament, so you can't do anything secretly. And that actually added another level of difficulty in some ways. But in that community, in our community, it's almost like that was left at the door and I was treated as a real person. Which again, if you're a public figure, you crave something chronic. And I found not only a comfortable thing in liberal Judaism, bear in mind, again, you've heard this from other people, I didn't know about liberal Judaism. Because all I'd ever experienced was Orthodox Judaism. And for me, it seemed to me that I would have to make a decision between how I felt politically and personally and religiously, and it didn't sit right. But I didn't know there was an alternative. So until I chanced upon Lincoln, it was like, wow, I never thought about this. So lots of lessons in there for all of us about people who are not involved but might like to be, but they've never come across liberal Judaism.
There is a certain irony, given what you've said about the separation between the public and the private, that you then go on to take a job that really puts that personal, in some ways, so publicly. What made you want to go and take what I think could be seen as one of the more difficult jobs in the Jewish community?
No. I think you've obviously got it wrong.
I've got it very wrong.
So I had been elected in 1997 and lost my seat in 2010, which is a pretty good innings, 13 years, all in government. As Danny said, I was also senior government whip, which so I know where all the bodies are buried, as they say. And I was a minister in 5 departments. But I went on that, in that second of losing my seat, I went from being a Minister of State, which is one level below cabinet, to being unemployed. And yeah, whoever went, that's exactly right. It's harsh. I'm not complaining. I just tell you that's a harsh reality that sometimes isn't understood. And so I had to rebuild my whole life from, in that flash, it's not a job, I lost my identity, I felt. I lost my community, as in Lincoln, I felt. This is all how I felt. Yeah. I lost, my reason really for my contribution in life. It all kind of went. And it's in a flash. And all these things, as you probably are picking up, are very important to me. So it was a real test. But, of course, who got in contact pretty quickly? Danny Rich. And for which I will always be grateful. And I should add, Charlie, my story about involvement is a real tribute to the outreach work of liberal Judaism. And I remember speaking one time, Danny got me to speak when I was still an MP at a patrons' dinner, and I just told my story. And I said, the money you give means that people like me have a home and you've got a friend in Parliament, and you've got a friend, and this is how it all works. But Danny got in contact with me, and apart from being, of course, very, very supportive because he realised what a difficult time it was, said the immortal words, "Of course you've got more time on your hands." I'd like you to consider, he didn't say consider actually, I'm making him much more polite than he is. I'd like you to be on the board of Liberal Judaism. And I didn't say yes straight away, and I don't know. It was all a bit too difficult for me to get my head around. But actually, in the end, I said yes, and it was one of the best things I could have done. Some of you in the room, people that I was on the board with, because, of course, I learnt about being on a board. I was serving our Jewish community at a national level, which was good for me. So I was kind of moving in that way. The Jewish Leadership Council invited me to be one of their vice presidents. I don't think in fact, they didn't have anybody who was in a vice presidential role who was progressive, so that was new as well. So I was starting to move in those areas. So I had 4 years between losing my seat and getting this job. Why did I do it? Well, okay, as it's obviously secret and not being recorded. So you need to know, because it was advertised publicly, but somebody that I know who works in the community rang me about it and said, I can still remember the phone call, and said, "I've seen this job, would you be interested?" Whoa, what is it? I was working for myself at the time, you see, in public affairs. It was all going very nicely, la, la, la. And he said, "Is the chief executive of the Board of Deputies?" Now, my response was, I fell about laughing. So you understand me, you know I do that. And then I said, "I'm terribly sorry, I didn't mean to laugh at you. I'm laughing at the idea that someone like me, and I mean that in all sorts of ways, could be the chief executive of the Board of Deputies." And I put the phone down and I thought, do you know what? It's not that stupid. It's got qualities about it that really talk to me. Service, identity, commitment, a cause that I believe in, a team. I was so missing being in a team, and I was so missing having a cause. It was actually beginning to do me in a bit, because I've realised that's very fundamental to me. And look, I'm getting more involved at a national level at the Jewish community, so why wouldn't I apply?
And so you did apply.
So I did.
And we've seen really wonderful changes and engagement since you've been in post.
Thank you.
It has to be said, though, that the last few months have probably not been the easiest. And this sense of integration that you talk about, and having found a place and a home and now a cause, to have a clash recently when we've seen the Board of Deputies take quite a public and vocal stance on anti-Semitism within the Labour Party. And you were present at the rally.
I spoke at the rally.
You spoke at the rally.
I was the last speaker.
And I wonder, and I imagine other people in the room wonder how you feel about that. And I know just over the time we've been here that there is questions for people in the room who would consider themselves Labour supporters as well, about where is their home, is there still a place for them? And I wondered how that felt for you.
I know that a lot of Labour people question, is it a home? And just to be clear, obviously, the Board of Deputies is a non-party political organisation. And I should add, of course, that it's cross-communal. And that, on both those counts, that's one of the many reasons that I really like working for the Board of Deputies. I like the place that it sits. But if I'm talking personally, so I was telling Charlie this story, and I'll tell you, when I don't know if many of you were at the rally. It was called the Enough is Enough rally outside Parliament, where we weren't sure what to call it even, because we didn't know how many people would come. So we didn't call it a demonstration, although people started calling it that, but we called it a gathering, and in the event, over 2,000 people came, which is unbelievable. This is at 24 hours notice. I was very, very touched at the rallying round, how the word went out, and because we had enough, actually. But my abiding memory, I think, there was, I was standing the whole time right near whoever the speaker was, until it was my turn. And I remember turning round, and there was like nearly, I don't know, or maybe, it's hard to say how many, but at least 50 Labour MPs and peers standing there. And of course I know most of them. And there was a point where I can remember them smiling at me. You know that way you smile at someone to encourage them, that they know that you're with them. And I was so touched, and then I thought, how did I come to this? That I'm in a position at the Board of Deputies on behalf of the Jewish community where my former colleagues are having to give me their support on the issue of anti-Semitism. This isn't right, which is kind of what we were saying. And I was the last one to speak, and of course I had words prepared, but before I said my prepared words, something came to me. And I said, and this is the truth, I never thought in a million years I would be standing here saying what I'm about to say to you about Her Majesty's opposition. And it's still, that still strikes me, because the reality is, day to day, I'm getting on with the job, and I leave, you always have to leave a certain amount of your emotions at one side. But it did get to me, because how could we have got to a stage where, one, we're so frustrated, but secondly, we've got very real and legitimate complaints about anti-Semitism within the Labour Party. This can't be right. So I really felt that in this moment. The other thing I felt, Charlie, was when I stood up to speak and I looked around, I was again very touched. I could not believe the support and the feeling. If you were there, you couldn't have missed it. It wasn't some sort of flash mob or people who hadn't thought about it. People were there because they had had enough. And this was their way. And it's a very rare thing for our community to take to the streets cross-communally like that.
And for those that criticised and said that the Board of Deputies was being political in that stance, that they were taking a move for the against the Labour Party that perhaps they weren't taking against the other parties, what would you say to them?
Not true. Number one, it doesn't matter to us where it's coming from. We will call it out, and we won't stop calling it out. The difference here is it's not of my making or the Board of Deputies making that the Labour Party has so many cases. And just remember, Jeremy Corbyn himself wrote to us. We had a lot of letters from Jeremy Corbyn in that period. The one I remember particularly, he accepts very clearly, and I always say this back to anybody who has a question about it, Jeremy Corbyn himself says that we're not talking about the case of a few bad apples. He acknowledges there's a problem, and he acknowledges it needs to be dealt with. Now, the problem is, it's still not being dealt with. So we've got the words. Now, we didn't even have the words before, but the leader of the Labour Party himself accepts the situation. Well, I think that probably says more than I could ever say.
Thank you. Where I'm going to ask you next, there's a kind of irony, I think, a little bit about it, because we're sitting at a keynote and it's two women sitting on the
I didn't even notice.
No, who noticed?
They haven't noticed.
But it has been interesting within the Board of Deputies that there haven't necessarily been full representation of women. And we certainly see in many organisations within the Jewish community that women aren't represented to the same amount that our male colleagues are. What do you think that you're an example for women in terms of the representation? Is there things that the board could be doing more to ensure that women are represented?
Well, I hope I am an example, but I don't hold myself up as an icon in any way. But, if there's anything I say or do that gives anybody, male or female or of any age or denomination, some sort of something that brings out something more in them, then I will be happy. We recently had elections, which you may or may not have seen. I know a number of you did, but it's only 4 weeks. Yeah. And our elections, and by the way, we have a number of deputies here. I would like you just to identify yourselves. And just Now, what a fine body of deputies.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to acknowledge the role of my friends here who are deputies, because they, like our lay leaders, our president and our vice presidents, do this voluntarily. And I really respect that and appreciate it, because without them there would be no board of deputies. And so our elections, so we have elections every 3 years. Our president and vice presidents are elected by deputies. Deputies are elected by their synagogues or their organisations. So we have a completely democratic and representative base. We're the only organisation that's in that position. And our elections produced remarkable results when it comes to on the gender agenda, which is, so Marie van der Zyl is our new president. Our senior vice president is Sheila Giewolb, and one of our vice presidents is Amanda Bowman. And we also have, okay. So, and then we have Stuart MacDonald, who represents Liberal Judaism, of course, is the treasurer, and Edwin Shuker is one of our new vice presidents. So all of the headlines are about, I think they said, women have taken over on the top table. And that is true, actually. Except there's lots of room for men and women in our organisation. But I'm really proud that the Board of Deputies, established in 1760, even though I haven't worked there that long, just feels like it's some days. I've been there for 4 years. The Board of Deputies, which people like to paint as some fusty old organisation. Who is the organisation leading the community and leading the community with a leadership like that? There isn't, it is unseen, and I'm really proud of it, because you have to create the conditions, don't you, for people to think they can come forward. And the Board of Deputies has been changing. But I think, what you saw recently, I think is quite remarkable.
Recently as well, we've also seen how difficult it can be to hold the voices of the community. We see it even within liberal Judaism. I felt it in recent times that we do have within just our liberal Judaism community a whole range of views, and that's never more present than over Israel. And I wonder how you manage that balance between such a widespread community and yet having to be a voice for that community. How do you balance those two things?
Well, as you rightly acknowledged, Charlie, it's a challenge not just for you, but in every denomination. I mean, your article in LJ today sets it out very well. The points you set out are the same ones that I have to consider. I did an interview recently with the Jewish Telegraph where it was like 20 questions, and one of the questions was, what's the best thing about your job? What's the worst thing? So I said, the best thing is the politics. I meant small p, not party politics, meaning the politics, the Jewish community, and the worst thing is the politics. And that is what I do think. Look, you can't have, can you, a cross-communal organisation, or I don't know any organisation where everyone thinks the same thing. Let's take LJ. Do I agree with everything that Danny Rich says? Do I agree with everything that Charley Bagnisky says? Probably. No, seriously, I don't. And I'm sure they don't agree with me personally, or, on all sorts of things. And that's fine, because we're an organisation here in Liberal Judaism that debates and discusses and comes to a view. Well, the Board of Deputies is no different. It's just our range is greater. But that's also our strength. Because what other democratic where do we get our legitimacy from? We actually get it from being an organisation that speaks for the whole range of the Jewish community, from those who are not even affiliated all the way through to the very Orthodox. I should just say, just on a matter of detail, the Haredim aren't members of the Board of Deputies. However, we do work well and have a good relationship, which I think is of benefit. So how do we manage that? Well, we take views, we listen. I recently went with Marie, and I noticed, thank you, in LJ today is a very nice article about when Marie, our new president, came to kind of formally meet Danny at the offices of Liberal Judaism. We've met every single head of the denominations, and that's the right thing to do. And that was about listening and talking, so understanding where people are coming from. And that's going on the whole time, not just when there's an election. So sometimes we have difficult subjects, sometimes we don't agree. And I recently went to see the Secretary of State for Education, Damien Hines, and we were talking about faith schools, and I said, look, this is our view, but you will know Secretary of State, not of the whole of the Jewish community, takes this view. And he said, yes, I'm well aware. Now, he's well aware because you've told him, but we've told him as well. So we're not frightened of that diversity of views. I think the main thing for me is about communication, and some trust and understanding that we can't all agree, but we do have to try and find a way of speaking for the community which encompasses the overall feeling of the community. Now, on individual subjects and for individuals that might grate on you very badly, okay, but that is the nature of any organisation.
Thank you. I think it's on that note that we should really hold it open to the floor so that they can have a chance, so that you can have a chance to be able to ask Gillian some questions. So Aaron is walking around with a mic. As you know from last time, for our keynote this morning, we have limited time, so we will try to take as many questions as we can. David, please try and keep it as a question. No.
Good afternoon, Gillian. Lovely to hear you again. As you know, I've just stepped down as being a deputy and having enjoyed 4 years under your leadership. And I want to ask you a closed question.
Does that mean a private question?
No. Closed. And I hope there's only one answer you can give, and it starts with
No
N.
pressure.
You've been chief executive now for 4 years, 4 good years. Do you have any intention of stepping down?
Ooh. Are you wanting my job? I have no plans to spend more time with anybody's family or anything else. Thank you. And David, thank you for your years of service. And I know you've encouraged young and new, fresh faces, which is exactly what representatives should do. So thank you.
At the back there.
Hi. With regards to the Israel conversation of the last month or two, Gillian, I'm intrigued to know what you think liberal Judaism's role is in terms of our wider community's engagement with Israel, and in particular, the move to create peace and end the occupation, and whether liberal Judaism has a particular role to play with that within our wider community.
Thank you, Graham.
Well, liberal Judaism has a major role, of course. And again, I refer you to Charlie's article in LJ today, where Charlie sets the challenge, rightly, of what sort of debate do we have. One of the things I do want to say in general terms, if I might I'm going to use your question to slightly go off piece, and then I will come back, is Marie van der Zyl chaired her first meeting of the Board of Deputies a few weeks ago, and the deputies that are here were present. And Marie, at the outset, said, the Board of Deputies is a place for diversity of views that we will air, and we will air those views in an environment of respect and courtesy. And people did behave in that way, and we had a whole discussion about recent events where there's a massive difference of opinion. But let me tell you, in my view, and I've heard this back from colleagues who were there, that debate, which of course is all live streamed, so everyone can watch it, it's very transparent, was indeed conducted with that courtesy and respect and listening. And that's the space the Board of Deputies has to give, as Liberal Judaism has to give it to members of Liberal Judaism. In terms of involvement, Graham, you give me the opportunity to make a plug here, which, thank you. On any issue, so again, like any organisation, if you want to have an input, get on the inside, not on the outside. So if your shul is not affiliated to the Board of Deputies for some unbelievable reason that I cannot imagine, B, is not taking up its quota of deputies, again for a reason I cannot imagine, make sure they do. And the other thing to make sure is, I also want to take the opportunity to say how we're funded. You know, over 3/4 of our income is from individual Jews, us. So when you get your invoice or bill or whatever you want to call it from your synagogue, there should be on there, and if it isn't, please raise it with your synagogue, a contribution of just £30 a year to the Board of Deputies. Now, one, please make sure it's on there, but secondly, please make sure that you do pay it. I don't think it's a lot to ask. I think Danny talked about gym membership. Well, you don't get anything for £30 a year at a gym, that I remember. But without the support of the community, the Board of Deputies cannot be the voice for you of any kind on Israel or anything. We just can't do it. So the answer really, Graham, on that issue, the role for Liberal Judaism, it's whatever you want it to be, and you have the opportunity to take that up, and I hope that you will do. I encourage each denomination to take up their quota, and I know there is capacity, and we've talked about this. You should say, you need to know, of course, I did mention you've already got in the honorary officers, so to say one of your own is putting it mildly. There are 2 LJ deputies. One is Lauren, who is sitting here, and the other one is Stuart MacDonald, and Stuart has been elected treasurer, so he sits. So you've actually got a direct person there. And we've also got LJ deputies like Karen and others who play leading roles within other structures, within committees and so on. So there's a lot of opportunity there.
And LJ Wynetza as well, hasn't it?
Indeed. Thank you.
Okay. I'm just curious about the respective roles of yourself as chief executive and the president. For example, on the recent statement on Gaza, which caused a certain amount of controversy, did you have input into that? Did you advise? And what happens if you really disagreed with the statement that was being put out?
So our honorary officers, our president, our vice presidents, they are elected and they are responsible to their electorate. So ultimately the buck stops with them, if you like. But we have a small professional team. So there's 10 full-time members of staff, 4 part-time members. I think we've got a very considerable output for our team. And on something like any statement, we've got a communications officer, we've got a director of public affairs, we've got the relevant member of staff who would work on that. We would talk with, the practicalities are, like, probably none of this should be a surprise really, that we would talk with whoever's going to be putting out the statement. At the time, it was the outgoing president, Jonathan Arkush, and the incoming president, Marie van der Zyl. We would talk to them about where they're going, what their policy is, what they want, and then, of course, we would draft it. But it's down to them to decide ultimately. So, yes, of course, we've got an input. On that particular statement, my own view is people were a bit... there was the letter which Charlie sent us. We also sent a letter back. Not that we do talk, but if you send us a letter, you get one back. And I'll be as tactful as I can, but in my view, circumstances and information had somewhat changed. I mean, Hamas had made it clear the nature of the people who were involved in a way that they hadn't earlier on. So in fact, I think the circumstances completely changed. It was what we suspected, that we were not talking about innocent people caught up in some kind of skirmish, but Hamas themselves, you don't need to ask me, Hamas themselves said these were overwhelmingly terrorists who were killed. which kind of does put a certain gloss on it.
Thank you, Gillian.
Gloss is the wrong word, forgive me. I'm looking angle. Angle's a better word. Yeah.
Our school is not a member of the Board of Deputies. We're not members. And the reason we're not members is because of the cost. Not the £30, but the cost of sending a representative every so often. We decided, we're a very, very small community, as Charlie will tell you. We decided we couldn't do it. And I'm curious about this because I feel we should be members. I'm the chair, but I'm a voice crying in the wilderness at the moment. But it is a problem when you have a small community with very little money.
Okay. How many members have you got, roughly?
42.
You see, if you were in Lincoln, you think that was quite big. Okay. You did, it was lovely, and you're always welcome. So Lincoln affiliated, I think, about a year ago to the Board of Deputies, which is historic. And as I said, there's about 30 of us. And it was just felt that actually it was right to be part of an organisation which is providing support and a voice. I mean, we haven't touched on specifics, but perhaps if I can just say the major thing we did, for example, in the run-up to the general election, our strapline is advocacy for the community. That is actually, in all sorts of ways, our primary focus. We created a Jewish manifesto. We'd never had one before in our community, and we consulted all across the community. So again, back to Graham's question, LJ would have been part of that. And it was a minor miracle to get an agreed set of policy asks on all the issues that the Jewish community is interested and concerned with, including, and then we distilled it into something called the 10 Commitments, not the 10 Commandments. 10 Commandments are easier than the 10 Commitments. And it allowed us to go to every single parliamentary candidate, and we revised it, by the way, for the local government elections as well, to say, are you with us? And then if they signed up and they got elected, we knew they were friends of ours. So we then recruit them to the all-party parliamentary group.
You should say that money should not be the prohibition.
No, money shouldn't be the prohibition. I would hope not, but just remember we also rely on income. What I tell you what I would say to you: if you've obviously got a real will, you want to join, you should absolutely have a discussion with us. But also, I would say to all of you, if you would like either myself or one of our honorary officers or another deputy to come and speak and meet with you to say, this is what we do, this is why you should join. That's what we're here to do.
And actually, the same is true with our relationship, in the sense that Gillian and Stuart and other people have come to our offices, not just on the official visits, but to sit and talk about how we can work together, what we need, what we want. Yeah, absolutely. Exactly, we can find them. Let's. We've got a question.
We will work with the board on getting it.
All right, thank you. Gillian, touching on what you were saying before, which I think is absolutely the case, which is that although the arithmetic is with United Synagogue, the progressive movement punches considerably above its weight within the board, partly as a result of your leadership. I was wondering whether you could encourage people here who have deputies to stand for election in the divisional elections that are coming up right now. The deadline is July the 5th. But to get the nominations in. But if you could just say it makes a real massive difference if people here could go home and encourage their deputies to stand. You often think, well, maybe I need to be there for 3 years before I stand for election. You know, as Nike says, just do it.
Well, I couldn't have put it better than Karen did. And, you know, we're a democratic and open organisation, so and you will understand that I don't show favour to anybody or any group in my role. And so I would say to anyone who's a deputy, you should consider standing for the divisions, mean the committees that deal with particular areas. And so there is the Finance and Organisation division or committee, which is led by Stuart MacDonald. Edwin Shooker leads the Community and Education division. Amanda Bowman leads the Defence division, and Sheila Giewolb leads the International division.
Thank you, Gillian. Got a question from Robin.
Hi, Gillian. So first of all, it's lovely to see you here.
Thank you.
Gillian and the organisation I work for share a building, so I get to see her every day. And my question actually was about that. So like you, I'm a communal civil servant, working across the community, but coming obviously very proudly from liberal Judaism. I was just wondering whether you might give us an insight from your perspective as to what it's like being a liberal Jew working across the community. What are the great things about it, and have you ever felt uncomfortable with the decisions you have to make or the way you have to represent the community, given that this is the bit of the community that you identify with?
Thank you.
Well, I mentioned earlier that for me, one of the many great things about the Board of Deputies is the fact it is cross-communal. I think that's where it gets its strength from. So when I and my team come into work, we park certain things, and I think that's right and proper. I don't mean we change, but our political... Don't forget, we've got a staff team, and Robin will bear this out, a staff team which is as diverse as anything you could imagine in terms of politics or none, affiliation and involvement, observance. We're a very, very diverse team and a very close-knit team, which I'm very proud of. And I would say to a person, we professionally put our personal views on one side in order to serve the whole of the community. Having said that, of course you've got a kind of a direction, but that's where and Margaret's question about how do you come to decisions, that's where that debate and the decision comes in. That, I think, strengthens us, that diversity. And I'm very, I want to emphasise, I'm very proud to be in this role, and very proud to serve the Board of Deputies and our community. And part of that is not just where I personally come from, but because I professionally see the value of what we're doing and the strength it gets from being cross-communal. I'm sure there's not a person in here, or maybe there is, who will say that in whatever organisation you work with, every single thing you absolutely love 110%. But that's life, isn't it?
Hi, Gillian. Thank you for sharing your story. I'm interested that you've been in public service with a political hat and now in public service with a Jewish hat. And I imagine there are quite a few of us in the room that are active in the Jewish community, but also maybe in our political environment. And I'm interested on your thoughts on where you think you can have the most impact. Is it with the political hat? Is it with the Jewish hat? Is it a combination?
Great question.
Well, one of the great things about my job, and one of the reasons that I was very keen to take the role on, and glad that I was appointed, is because actually there are plenty of politics externally. I talked about our advocacy. So we work, and I particularly bring my political contacts and my experience into it for the benefit of the community. I like the fact that what I've done before is useful to us. So I'm able to talk with whether they're local authority representatives, senior civil servants, government ministers, opposition, spokespeople or MP. It doesn't matter who people are in any party. I've got a very, very good relation. And part of that is that they know what my background was. And it's very interesting how well received I am from those from all parties. Because at the end of it, when you're a politician or a former politician, the thing you absolutely love is someone who speaks your language. Again, it's in any sort of walk of life. You feel more comfortable, don't you? And kind of, people are very, my credit is good from my time in Parliament because of the way I worked there. So they knew what I was, but they also had a lot of respect for how I approached differences, the way I got legislation through, the way I talked to they were the opposition then, the way I talked to those in the opposition and the way I showed them respect. So actually, I find I have so there's enough politics to satisfy me that I'm using my non-party political skills for the benefit of the community. because I think we need good political advocates. We really do.
Thank you, Gillian.
Hi, Gillian. I've been given to understand that my local MP, Joan Ryan, who is the chair of the Labour Friends of Israel, is potentially facing a deselection motion from the hard left. What advice would you give to all of us about the steps we can be taking to ensure that good people don't get thus affected?
I will tell Joan that's the response that she got, which is quite right. Joan is a tremendous advocate for us, and she's fearless. I used to be in the whip's office with her, and she's the right person. She's chair of Labour Friends of Israel, and absolutely the right person. And these threats of deselection are, for me, outrageous. I know they exist, not just in Joan's area. Charlie asked the question earlier about being in the Labour Party. Again, without wishing to be partisan in any way, I always believe you're better off on the inside than on the outside. So whatever your political party is, you do have an opportunity to bring a Jewish voice into that party. I also, on a personal level, never hesitate to send a personal message of support. If you feel strongly about whoever your local representative is, don't assume that they know how you feel. Always tell them. I mean, that's probably good advice on anything. You'll decide if you're a Labour Party member in your area, you will decide what to do. But this is part of the problem that we're dealing with, that those Labour MPs who stood by us on the issue of anti-Semitism, are getting a backlash from certain quarters. And we said to Jeremy Corbyn, you have to stop that. You have to stop that. He has said that verbally, absolutely, but it's action that we're looking for, because those people should never, ever be pilloried for standing up for what is right.
Gillian, thank you so much for being with us, for exploring your own self as well as your politics and career. It's been really appreciated. I think it's been really interesting. I also think the challenge to us to be in the room rather than outside it is one I know that we're going to take away with us, but it's lovely having you in our room and on our side. So thank you very much, and safe journey home.
Thank you.